Russia. Former Ambassador Michael McFaul, Obama's ambassador to Russia, had a very interesting line on U.S.-Russian relations. He said, the administration seems to be pursuing a pretty sensible policy on Russia. It's tightened the sanctions, it's given the Ukrainians some help. The only thing is the President of the United States does not seem to agree with his administration's policy. Have you ever seen something like this where the President is going in one direction and the policy in another?
I do think what is interesting, we have both been involved in decision-making systems. Most of the history of this country is we know how to make decisions. I teach about all of this at Georgetown, and the decision-making process simply does not work. The president goes and does his own thing. Then somebody says he meant to say, and then he disagrees with that. And I do think that he does see some kind of kinship with Putin. And the Russians are trying very hard to undermine our democracy and to separate us from our allies. And I think in many ways, Trump is almost a gift to Putin in terms of trying to explain why should we deal with those Europeans or why should we have anything to do with NATO. And I just visualize, and I bet you do, Colin, kind of, can you imagine going back to your office and thinking, oh my, how did that happen? Why is he saying this? This doesn't make any sense. Because as Ambassador McFaul said, there are some pretty good things that are going on in terms of cooperating with our allies on sanctions because of their attempts to poison people and a variety of things. And I think that the president is not exactly following the decision-making process.
I think we should speak firmly with respect to Russian actions. And I've worked with Mr. Putin, as Madeleine has. He's tough. He's KGB. And he'll remain KGB, but at the same time, he's restored pride to the Russian people, something they had lost after the end of the Cold War. And we should take that into account. We should also, I think, not try to make him an enemy, but the Pentagon is busy thinking about that, thinking about China as an enemy. We're thinking too much about adversarial relations as opposed to diplomatic relations. Now, I'm not being a flower child this afternoon, but I've seen what diplomatic relations can do. When you reach out to somebody, let them know what you have to have, and let them know what you think they're doing wrong. Now let's talk about it and see if we can solve problems. And I think I have been fairly good at that in solving problems without going to a conflict. We have to go to a conflict. I know how to do that too. But let's not do that. Let's find ways to talk and engage, recognizing that not everybody is like the United States.
Iran. President Trump is pulling out of the Iran deal, and the question becomes, will Iran stay in? What happens? Does this make sense to you that we had a system that seemed to be working? The president says the Iranians were still being too adventurous, and so he pulled out. Where do we go from here?
The 2015 agreement had nothing to do with their terrorism. I deplore it, and I think they're terrible, or some of the other terrible things they do. I remember vividly that there were 18,000 centrifuges spinning, producing fissile material that could be made into bombs. And the agreement that the president got into, what Obama got into, was let's get this stopped, then we can worry about these other things. And that has happened, even though those who oppose the agreement swear that, no, it hasn't stopped. They're ready to break out any time. Well, if we're going to break at any time, the best time would have been before the agreement. And so I think the agreement makes sense. They're not violating it. No independent agency says they're violating the agreement. 18,000 centrifuges are no longer spinning. It's down to 6,000 for medical or laboratory purposes. Fissile materials being shipped out of the country, and they want some of their money back. And people say, well, they'll use it for terrorism. They'll use it for a lot of things. They'll use it to buy airplanes to move their people around, and they'll use it for our economy as well. That doesn't mean we don't attack them and all the other bad behaviors that they have. But this agreement, I thought, was very good. But you won't find anybody in the Republican Party who voted for it or even said anything nice about it except me and Brent Scowcroft.
That gets back to, in a sense, where we started, Madeleine. It does feel like the Iran deal, so many of these things fall prey to a kind of partisanship that has gotten so heightened, where just because Obama signed it, it must be undone. And it's difficult to find. I mean, do you recall the parties being as polarized as they are now?
No, I do not. And I think that both of us, actually, as we were saying, first of all, we're good friends, but also I think we both made an effort to be bipartisan when we went to the Hill or just generally. And I'm very troubled. And the hard part, Fareed, is that it's very hard to explain to people what is going on in the United States because we have been dependable. And we have not kind of broken agreements. And why would anybody make another agreement with us if all of a sudden the president just decides to pull out? And so I think that it is very hard for I've spent a lot of time this summer in Europe and trying to explain to people what is going on and why we would pull out of an agreement that actually was doing exactly what Colin was saying, which is not solving everything, but dealing with the most dangerous aspect in terms of their nuclear capabilities. And so it just shows a complete lack of understanding, first of the issue, and then what the effects of having such a scattered policy is, and what the effects are of watching the United States going through a tumultuous time where there is just hatred, I think, in a way that I've never seen before, and disrespect for the other party. I really am appalled.
A lot of it is, frankly, a Congress that does not function like the Congresses that you and I have worked with in the past. In those days, you had, I called them the cardinals of the Congress, who can make something happen. But now they are so tied up in partisan activity. And frankly, your profession, I'm sorry to say, has a lot to do with this. Cable television on the right, cable television on the left, and social media make it extremely hard for them to do the jobs they were sent here to do. And so they get caught up in that. And then the money that's in politics and the gerrymandering and all the other things. This is not the same legislative system that I worked with for almost 40 years in my public life.
Before we go, I have to ask you, just as a woman, what did you think of the events of the last week at the Supreme Court, and particularly Dr. Ford's testimony?
Well, I think I can't even think of an adjective that fits this because it was so very hard, the whole situation, and her incredible dignity in dealing with something that is very hard. And I think blaming the victim. But I also think that what is so important is for us to work together, men and women, on having the America that we believe in, where people are treated with respect and where people are willing to speak out and then are not put down in terms of making up things. And so I really am troubled. And so, it took me a long time to find my voice. And I'm not going to be quiet now. So I'm glad you asked that, because I think that we all need to speak out on behalf of what we believe and to respect each other. I think that is where we need to find out. And I spoke about the fact that there are divisions in society. That was how we started this. There are. But great leadership, and you asked Colin, and he is one of the great leaders, is what you try to do is find common ground and not exacerbate the differences by pitting one group of people against another. And that is what's going on now. And that's not the America that I know.
Both Madeleine and I were in charge of immigrations and State Department and visas and the rest of that. And what I often tell people when they ask me, well, how about all this immigration thing and how are we doing? And I say, let me tell you what, tomorrow morning at every consular office that we have, at every embassy, people will be lined up. When they get to the window, they all say the same thing. I want to go to America. We were such a magnet for so many years. We have shown the rest of the world what you can do with immigration. We have been an example to the rest of the world, and that example is being badly damaged now. We somehow have got to get back on track.
I have to say, it is such an honor to have both of you on, and such a pleasure to see you all engage with such civility. A conservative Republican, a liberal Democrat. God bless America. Thank you.
God bless you for what you're doing for real.
Thank you. Thank you very much.